For the last time, welcome, and I'm really glad to see all of you here. My name is Martina Sarvašová, and I am from Slovakia, but I studied in Czech Republic in South Moravia, and I continued my studies in Australia, and I also lived in the United States, so my sort of perception of the profession is influenced by a lot of inputs. And why I named this presentation Landscape Architecture as a profession, 3 dots, because in Czech Republic, the perception of the profession is very different from what we've heard today. I must say I'm very glad that even though the topic of this conference is landscape transformations, we haven't heard anything about gardens or parks. Because this is what landscape architecture is in Czech Republic. And in my presentation... And green infrastructure, yeah. And the word green works really well. And I'm surprised that although we are at the Czech Chamber of Architects, we have green pictures here. Maybe it's there, like paying back to the landscape architects, So I would be very brief because a lot of what I want to talk about was said already in your presentation, in Christina's presentation. So I would like to talk just a little bit about what is landscape, although we already did, what is landscape architecture, the history of the profession, and then the current professional situation and issues in Czech Republic, and then the question how to establish landscape architecture course in Czech Republic. So what is landscape? Yeah, we already went to that based on European Convention, it means an area of both built and unbuilt, which is a very important fact. And landscape has its different characteristics in temporal form, meaning it's not instant. You cannot wait that you'll get the solutions soon, because it needs to grow. It needs to grow, it needs to transform and reform and such and such. So, and it goes back to the past, and it also predicts the future. So landscape is not static as an object. Landscape is a system, and we have to see it holistically, and we have to know all the parts of the systems that works the spatial form, which is not an Emmental cheese. It's not the green behind the cities, it includes all. And landscape is very flexible and resilient. I know that resilience is a very fancy word nowadays, and all the conferences have sustainability and resilience in their topics, but it's very important because landscape really can adjust and adapt to the changing conditions. So it is really everywhere and anywhere outdoors, and it doesn't matter if we are in strictly urban conditions, as we are right now in Malostranské náměstí, or if we are in rural conditions outside in the countryside, which we refer to as landscape. And landscape is very intensively connected with its perception, which has changed over times with the development of the civilization. The word Landschaft appeared or the word landscape comes from Landschaft and appeared in the 16th century and was connected with the invention of the cloth glass, which was a tool that helped catch the landscape within something you can really like see and touch. And this tool worked as a mirror, and you had to step backwards, and you were watching the landscape in the mirror like this. And it was actually a tool for painters who were catching the perfect scene for their paintings. And it was Claude Lorrain who invented it. That's why it's called cloth glass, and sometimes also black mirror. On the other hand, what's happening today is that we all have smartphones, and although I have one, and we just started to perceive landscape completely differently, and we are giving it these additional layers because we got bored. We are bored in public spaces, we got isolated in public spaces, and we got isolated in landscape, and we live our own lives in our own reality that we are creating. So from social gathering, we got to the social gathering on the social networks. And we completely isolated ourselves, not only from the public space, but from the landscape itself, and we are building our own reality around us. And this is actually one of the recent challenges that us, as planners, designers, landscape architects, and architects have to face, and we have to adjust to that, and we have to provide answer. And I think that as we mentioned, education and all that we need to re-educate ourselves, our children, and such like that. We have to react very, particularly to these issues. So what is landscape architecture? When one thinks of landscape architecture, he usually looks from his back door to his garden to his backyard to the different level of the scale. And now I'm referring to Czech Republic. And I know it's different in the world, because what should happen is that you should look from your front door to your streets, to the suburbs, and to the rest of the world. Because what landscape architects do, and not only them, I don't want to like put them in the boxes that this is for architects, this is for urban designers, this is for landscape architects. But one of the role of landscape architect is to build public spaces within the cities which are part of an urban landscape. And these are examples from the Copenhagen. One is 1993, and it's literally a living room in the middle of the city. And then the new example from 2013, it's cooperation of Topotec 1 and BIC, which is well-known studios. And they won this competition of redeveloping the public space in order to address the social issues of the neighborhood, and they did really well. And when I said the rest of the world, we really need to think in a large scale. And these new tendencies that we are facing in the world are really thinking in XL scales. If you look at the Chinese theories, of course they start at the local base, but they go to the old regional scales, because landscape architecture, as it's working with all the systems and the natural systems, it really is influencing, the big areas. And this is an example of a Topos Award from year 2011 that was awarded to Antje Stockmann, who is a professor at the University in Stuttgart, and she was awarded for promoting the profession of landscape architecture in this large scale and for her interdisciplinary approach. So she literally is putting professionals together and creating multidisciplinary teams who are dealing with the landscape issues. So landscape architecture, in the definition of the IFLA Charter for Landscape Architectural Education, is interdisciplinary field that consists of several major components such as humanities, social and natural sciences, technology, and creative arts, blah, 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 blah. So how did it all start? I'll go very briefly through the history. This is the image that is representing the landscape from 4th century before Christ in China. And it is an image of the ideal landscape of 8 islands, the land of immortals, and it shows the 8 islands in the sea of immortality, when there was a golden castle in the middle at one of the islands with the diamonds growing on the trees. There was wine instead of water in the sea, and everybody was happy and fed and was not thirsty. It was this ideal paradise that people were hoping to find. And this continued later on in the Renaissance and then in English landscape tendencies of building Arcadias. Arcadias were these eternal paradises where shepherds were so just happy within the landscape that provided food, that provided shelter, and that was easy to look through, so it was safe and it was understandable and it had a human scale. And this theory kind of was applied, although it crushed a little bit when we got to these 100% urbanized areas. And Central Park is the result of the human need of this piece of paradise within the heavily urbanized environment. So this is what we are dealing nowadays, and although Central Park is from 1863, it was kind of a breaking point in defining these urban landscapes and these urban landscape settings that we are facing nowadays and that we have to deal with. And if we go very briefly through the evolution of landscape architecture, it started as an ornamental art that was closely attached to objects. And it evolved in its spatial interaction, in work with terrain, water, and vegetation, to the very recent theories that are working, as on the last slide, in layers with all the other professionals and disciplines are really addressing contemporary issues such as climate changes, population explosion, the non-renewable and renewable resources, and such and such. And why do we all need that? Why do we need that profession? We need it from a simpler reason, because we are really facing a heavy urbanization and a very massive population growth. And it is said that by 2050, there will be 800 million cities. Cities which are growing faster than we can even perceive it. And we need multidisciplinary teams that can deal with these issues and that can help build these cities. So this is like a brief explanation of why landscape architecture is one of the fundamental parts in all the design processes. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it's really important. And now what is the situation in Czech Republic? You can study landscape architecture in Czech Republic at 3 universities. At the Mendel University in Brno, at the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague, and then as a module at Czech Technical University in Prague. But what is the crucial thing is that all these universities, except the CTU, are agriculturally based. They have agricultural background. So The graduates are specialists in botany, in biology, in ecology, in the systems, but they have, and pardon me, I'm also a graduate from Menlo University, we have no clue what is urban life, and what is urban setting, and what are the urban conditions. And we can make things look pretty, but we are not concerned about sustainability and resilience and such. So what I think that there's a really need to establish a degree at the architectural-based university, such as CTU, which nowadays has sort of a module, and you can graduate in landscape module as a landscape architect, and you can ask for authorization, but now don't take it personally. I think that the graduates from the module are 95% architects with a bit of a knowledge of the dendrology and botany, in my understanding. So I did last year a bit of a research of how many people per year graduates at which level, and we can tell that, well, from when it all started, we have around 1,000 landscape architects in Czech Republic, out of which 176 are authorized, which literally means that it allows them to work on a public projects. Which would be okay, because, you know, the percentage of the architect is fine, but what we also have in Czech Republic is what we call a big authorization. And the big authorization means that you can do whatever you want to do. You can do urbanism, architecture, and landscape architecture. And we have 2,400 people, and they were given their authorization way back, maybe even in the era we've been talking about. And this process stopped in 2005, but since then it didn't change. Now, the conditions to get these big authorizations are different, and you really have to prove the knowledge in all the fields. But if you have the existing one, they cannot take it from you. So we are facing a lot of experts who are educated in different conditions and different systems, and they are still allowed to authorize these big public projects, and they don't need a landscape consultant for nothing, because they have the stamp, which I think is a really big problem, because then the results in our public space look like it is. And there's also a big misunderstanding of what landscape architecture is and what should its role be. And there was a workshop last year held at the Czech Chamber of Architects. It was called Eastern European Landscape Architect Workshop, and we invited representatives from Eastern European countries, and they were usually professionals and from different associations. And together we were trying to identify what are the issues and what are the current aspirations and barriers in the landscape architecture in Czech Republic or in the Eastern Bloc, if you may. And what was identified as the biggest barrier is that landscape is not priority. There's a lack of will to fight for what you believe in, lack of thinking in long-term future, and ethic versus surviving, which is the thing that we are facing, all of us, in our practice. Because I must say, I'm not only academic, I'm a practicing landscape architect, and I'm facing these issues every day. It's like running with my head against the wall, and I just get smacked each time I try to do something. That's why I am in the research, and I try to be active in academic environment, so I can influence, as Christina is influencing people like in the kindergarten, I'm at least trying to influence people at the university education level and talk to them and explain and discuss and kind of try to push this somewhere else. And what was identified as aspiration, meaning what do we want to gain in the future, was the promotion of landscape architecture visibility, influence in legislation, recognition or authorization, if you may, interdisciplinary approach, and just support the identity. And these graphs are outputs of this workshop, where participants identified the main issues and tried to put them in a relationship. And the outcome, we can very briefly say that there's a lack of, there's a very weak identity, which gives us bad professional image, and there's general lack of education. And not only for the practitioners or professionals, but for the public and our policymakers, because they don't know what they can get. So they don't ask for that. What they ask for is, well, I want to shape public space, okay, I'll ask architect, and then the architect is influenced by the developer, and actually he doesn't really know what landscape is and how it can work. So our proposals are rather very strict and kind of very old-fashioned, if you may. And following this workshop was a brief questionnaire survey, and we got responses for, unfortunately, only 6 countries, but I tried to work the numbers, and I realized that generally all of us are facing the same situations. We have some percentage of landscape architect within the institution compared to architects, which doesn't really show massive differences, but what shows differences is the income. Which goes back to the question of what landscape architecture as a profession is. Are you able to survive as a landscape architect? In Czech Republic, hardly. Hardly, because your income is really influenced by the demand on the market, and you have to usually work your ass off during nights, and it's really... You have some comment to that?
No, you are absolutely right. Yeah, it's not possible to live from landscape.
Yeah, so you really have to either have a realization company as your friend and live on provision, or have a very good friends in the municipality that will give you the projects right away. And I can tell you from what I know, in Prague, each part of Prague has its own architect, plus landscape architect, and the projects are very carefully divided. And you're lucky if you get to that and you can learn on that. Yeah, and you can get your piece of cake.
Can you explain?
Yeah, this is the comparison. This is the ratio of the average income plus the income of landscape architect within the 5 years after graduation. So if the ratio is higher, it says that the practice is really like it's good paid. But if it's lower, like in many cases it is, so it shows that the profession, you know, gets like really low money. Although this is in euros, this is in dollars, it's ratio plus.
So it means that Austria is bad in this?
No, in Austria it's much better. Yeah. I'm really bad with numbers, but in Austria is landscape architect, because this is what you get in Czech Republic as landscape architect, this is what you get in Austria.
Okay, and this is the first row is the average income,
Yeah.
and the second is landscape architect income.
Exactly. So the question, and I must say in Czech Republic, if you want to be a researcher, you really have to produce the Excel sheets and the graphs, and you really have to prove that you do a research, which I think that in fields such as an architecture is very complicated. And in landscape architecture, if you're not focusing on, you know, dealing with the ornamental plants and their ability to survive in urban conditions, it's rather difficult. So I'm still kind of dealing with my research question, but it gets to the point like how to establish landscape architecture in Czech Republic. And I think that there are 4 ways how to do that. And you have to combine promotion, create demand, provide supply, and then change the policy. And I think that it can work in 2 ways, from the bottom to the top, or from the top to the bottom. So we can use these 4 steps like this or vice versa. And I like to start with the promotion of the profession as it is, and that's why I have these lectures, that's why I organize this conference, and that's why I'm trying really to explain and talk with people about what it is. And I think that it's very necessary to define what landscape architecture is nowadays, and that we really shifted from garden design to urban design. Then what is the domain and defining aspect of 21st century landscape architecture? Then I'd like to promote desirable projects based on some designated criteria, but definitely to support professional identity and build a respected position within professional association. And then the other steps are, I think that if we promote the profession as it is, that the demand will arise and will create the demand. So the developers and the investors and the policymakers will know what they want, and they can ask for it. And by exhibitions, workshops, and community meetings and talks, I think that we can improve and show really what this profession is. And then also we can provide the supply by the improved education. Because I think that if we start educating professionals now, when they finish school, they have nothing to do because they don't find a job. Because they get back to the system and they face the same issues and they're working with the same architects and professionals, and it's like the circle that you cannot really, I don't know at what point to break it and how to jump out of that. And I think it's a very complicated process, but I believe that it may work this way. And then the last point will be the policy that will arise as a natural need. On the other hand, we can discuss if this whole process can work vice versa. Start with the policy, that's something that we've been discussing, and then naturally it will increase the need of having these professionals. But it's still, this is up to discussions, and this actually need a bit of research to support that. And what is my kind of my goal. I would really like, in the words of Richard Weller, not end up as a putting parsley on roasted pig. I don't want to garnish our environment. I want to shape it. And I think that landscape architects and landscape architecture is a place-making and place-shaping profession. And this just illustrates architect in black and landscape architect in green, just helping to put a bit of a garnish on the roasted pig. So I think that we need to roast the pig first. And that's all from me, and I thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions and comments, anything else?
Is it possible to establish a network of selected professionals in various disciplines and stuff like that in order to improve the situation here?
There is a network.
Okay.
And I'm
Is
very
it working?
unproud of it, but this network is a mess. And there are just groups of people that don't like each other, and they do things on purpose. And
Still have to work together?
well, they look like they work together, but in reality they work against each other. And we have this not we, them, although I was trying to be part of it, but then I realized it's a big job right now. So there is a Garden and Landscape Association of Czech Republic, which is as an NGO, but it groups all the professionals. And on the yearly fee, you are a part of this association. And this association is part of the European Network of Landscape Architects, or EFLA, European Federation. Now it's IFLA, now it's International Federation of Landscape Architects. So it is a professional association that is grouping all the professions together and do workshops and talks and seminars, and they have regular meetings. But within these organizations, the core is not healthy. So it's really hard to implement something within the change, because there are people who do the decisions, and as far as I'm concerned, they are leading the whole image of the profession.
Okay.
As individuals.
It has to be changed.
Yeah, it has to be changed too. And when I was proposing to having a new degree, because we have a representative from the University of Life Sciences, I'm not saying that the existing degrees are bad. They're really good, but in a different field of the profession. Like people from Lednice, they're really good in cultural landscapes outside the cities. But when it comes to the urban environment, they're lost. I would like to add another one that would be dealing with the urban problems. And I would like, but it's my dream to create a cooperation. The education of architects in Czech Republic is very influenced by what architecture is. And architecture in Czech Republic produce objects. But if you want to be a strong partner, you have to be better than them. And that's a big challenge, because having everything about landscape architecture plus architecture gets really, And I would just add a last comment to your question. At the Faculty of Architecture, we have two departments. Department of Spatial Planning and Department of Urbanism. Although we think it's the same. We have two. And the urbanism is the leading partner in shaping the new degree. And the head of the Department of the Urbanism doesn't respect European Landscape Convention. So that's the answer. That answers all. Okay. So it's really hard to start any discussion when there's someone who sets the rules and he doesn't respect what is applied within the whole Europe. That person doesn't respect European Convention, so the education is adjusted in the way that the landscape is happening outside the city.